Welcome all. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. So, first of all, I would like to wish you all a very happy new year 2021. I hope all you and your family members and friends all are very healthy and grow very good and learn more in the new years. Of course, yes, we always say learning is healthy, learning is good, learning is mind blowing. So we wish you all very happy and prosperous 2021. So with this notes, let's start with our new series on security series. We will talk about new security related features, functions, and what are the confusing element in that. So as you might have seen already my screen, and the topic that we are touching today is the security series S3 bucket policy, S3 ACL, and IAM policy. So yes, I mentioned confusion because these three policies sometimes disturbs each other's, disturbs which ones to choose and why to choose when we talk about bucket policy. So when and which requirement will fit the bucket policies, which requirement will fit the S3 ACL policies, and which requirement will fit the IAM policies. So when to choose IAM policy, when to choose bucket policies, and which scenarios will you require to choose ACL policies, S3 ACL policies. We'll try to figure out and we'll find out. So let's check this out. Okay, so if you are seeing, I have just tried to go through this diagram so that you better understand which and what things we are talking about here. So for example, if an end users trying to access a bucket, right? So you have three options where you can set all your things. First of all, your first option is AWS IAM policies. So you can create a IAM policies where you can grant a user a permission for a particular bucket, right? And then they can access it. Or you can create a bucket policy also. Inside the bucket, you can write down the JSON policies where you can give the permission to that particular IAM users, right? Or you can write a bucket ACL also. These policies are also there which grant or deny the accesses for the bucket. So eventually whatever the final policy you got out of these three will be your final policy and you get the bucket access. But we need to know when to choose IAM policies, when to choose bucket policies, or when to choose ACL policies, and what should be our decision point in choosing out of these three, which one will be beneficial. We'll see that. Okay, so let's see. So first we will find out where we define the policy. So as I mentioned, yes, 3+ IAM policies. So what policy, when we define a policies, it is applied to the principal. For example, users, groups, or roles, right? Because IAM, you create what? We create users, groups, and roles, and then we assign it to the different elements or different principal or different services, right? EC2 services. If you create a roles you can attach to the users, or you group also, or you can directly attach your policies to the users or group, right? We all know that. So IAM policies, it is applied to the principals, right? Whenever you create. Second, bucket policies. So bucket policies, it is applied to the bucket only, of course, because it is limited to the bucket, right? We do not attach this policy to any users, right, or group or role. It is limited and attached to the bucket. Okay, S3 bucket. ACL, when we say ACL, I mention star intentionally so that it is clear we are talking about the S3 ACL, because ACL is the access control list. It's a very generic term. So whenever you define any policy, you can tell that it's an access control mechanism. So that's why I'm talking about the S3 ACL. So in the S3 you have a ACL also where you define the control policies, and it is applied not to the bucket, it is applied to the individual object inside a bucket, right? So if you could go to the bucket, there you can find the ACLs are there. So you can apply to ACL to the bucket level permissions, granted granular level permission for that bucket objects. Okay, so these are three things where we define the policies. So but we need to figure out what and when we need to choose out of these three. So that's what we will learn it here. So let's proceed and find out. So here we see which one for what. IAM policies. So let's figure out which one for what IAM policies when to choose. So what does IAM policy do? IAM policy specify what actions are allowed or denied on what AWS resources, right? So you have many AWS resources, like you have EC2 instances, you have S3 buckets, right? Or any DynamoDB services, right? So if you want, yeah, your end users or end principals, right, which wanted to grant access or not grant access, right, for a particular services. For example, a person named Johnny wanted to grant access of a S3 bucket, right? Then S3 is a resource, right? So that resource Johnny want to gain, then we can define that policies that Johnny will grant or get a access of that particular S3 resources. So that's why we say what actions are allowed or denied on AWS resources. So Johnny will get a access of allow or deny for S3 bucket. Example, EC2 terminate instance access I mentioned here. So if Johnny get a access to allow EC2 terminate instances, if you want to define such policy, then you will find it in the IAM policies. You attach IAM policies to IAM users, group and roles, which are then subject to the permission you have defined, either allow or deny. In other words, IAM policies define what a principal can do in your AWS environment, right? So whenever you want, suppose in your company you have 100 employees, right, and you want all of them to have a S3 bucket access, so then you will of course go to the IAM policy, create a group, right, write down a policy and attach that to the group, and then you will get access to the S3 buckets for all of them. So such kind of requirement you will touch base in the IAM policies. I will go further on this in the deep dive. Next, S3 bucket policies. So what does S3 bucket policy do? They are attached only to the S3 bucket, as the name says, and S3 bucket policy specify what action are allowed or denied for which principal on the bucket. That are bucket policies is attached. So here we are forcing or focusing ourselves on the principals. Okay, we are focusing on the principal. What are the principal? Principal are users, groups and roles that we are defining under the IAM. So whenever you write S3 bucket, I'll just show you in the next slide how does it looks like, what are the difference in that. Okay, so whenever you write S3 bucket policy, you are focusing on the which person principals which person or principal we require the access, grant or deny. For example, David want to put but not delete objects in the bucket. So this you can of course define. You can of course define in the IAM policies also, but when you are focusing on the bucket policy, you have to define the principal ARN in that policies. Okay, and suppose for example you have 10,000 employee in your company, right, and you want all of them to have a S3 bucket, specific S3 bucket only read access, right? So you, instead of assigning or daily basis your new joining is coming, right, and you want all of them to automatically gain that particular S3 bucket read access, so you are not going to write every day a IAM policy and attach the new user to that. Better you write a S3 bucket policy, right, and grant that this S3 bucket policy has a read only access for the IAM users, and they will get the access, so that it will be very easy to control. For example, you attach S3 bucket policies at the bucket level. You can't attach a bucket policy to a S3 object that I mentioned. It is applied to the entire. So as you said, you can attach the S3 bucket policy at the bucket level, and you can't attach a bucket policy to S3 object. So of course, yes, S3 bucket policy is applied to the entire bucket. So inside the object also it will be applied once it is applied to the bucket level. Okay, so let me show you how does it looks like the difference. Okay, it will be more clear to all of us. So when you say the policies, left hand side mention bucket policy and right hand side mention IAM policy. So if you see the version is there, statement are there, both are same. Then the effects either allow or deny. But I have mentioned like S3 bucket policy, you have to define the principal. Principal are what? Principal are the ARN of the IAM ARN, right, which are there in your AWS. So if you see in the bucket policy, I need to define a principal for which person you want to allow. Who are those person, or the principals who require the access of this bucket. So I have to define in that bucket, yes, this is LS, for example, in this case, or this is the root user who required this. Action is what? S3 action, and resource is the bucket name, right? So S3 bucket policy say allow principal Alice or root, and require action is on S3, and S3 which resource? This is my underscore bucket resource. But how does IAM policy is the difference here? IAM policy says effect allow, action S3, and resource. So in the IAM policy, if you notice, we have not defined the principal. Why we have not defined the principal here? Because IAM policies, these policies are attached to the principal already, right? Because when you create a policy in IAM, right? In IAM, what you define? You define a user, remember, right? You define a group, right? And you create a role, right? So all these three are a principal where you attach already to the principal. The moment you write this JSON policy in IAM, you have to attach this policy in the principal. So you don't need to define it again in the policies, right? They are attached to the principal already, and it means those particular principal will run this or utilize this policy. However, in S3 bucket, you do not have an option to attach the policies to the principal. So you need to define it under the policy statement. Logically, if you see, right? So you don't need to define, you need to define this in the principal, right? Which principal this bucket policies will be applied in the S3 bucket. However, in the IAM policy, we don't need to do that. So that's a key difference. So whenever you see such policies where you see a principal, then you immediately understand it is not a IAM policy. The principal is defined here. It is must the bucket policies. Okay. So mind in that. Okay, that's a very good key understanding. You can easily make out whether it is a bucket policy or IAM policies. Okay. So next thing we'll see. So okay, so we know that the three policies are there and all, right, but when to use IAM policies, which scenario I have to use, okay, when I need to use IAM policy. So this question you need to ask yourself, what can this user do in AWS? So when you ask this question, right, you need to choose IAM policies. For example, I want to ask a question, right? Johnny can do what all Johnny can do in AWS. Can Johnny access S3? Can Johnny access EC2 instance? Can Johnny access DynamoDB? Can Johnny access a specific Lambda? If I'm talking about a particular user, not about a particular bucket, right? I'm asking a question for a particular user, then I need to see myself looking into the IAM policy always. Okay, you need to go to the IAM policies if you are talking about a specific users or principals, right? So you need to control access to AWS services other than S3, right? You want, like, not only S3, you want to control your EC2, Lambda, right, for particular users or principal, right? If you are asking that question, that principal or users want to access to S3, want to access of EC2, right? Go to IAM policy, clear head, no need to think twice, right? Even though if that particular users want to get access of S3 also, if you are talking about one user, clearly go to the IAM and do that, right, policy. That will be better way of controlling your S3 access for that particular users, right? So IAM policy will be easier to manage since you can centrally manage all your permission in IAM instead of spreading them between IAM and S3, right? Don't spread much between these two. If you're talking about one users, two users, if you're talking about principal that you want to give access to that particular thing, right? Thinking this is your question in mind, go ahead, do it in IAM policies, right? So this is the case for that you need to use for the IAM policies. Okay, so what next? So when to use bucket policy then? Okay, so if you have a question in your mind, who can access this particular S3 bucket? If that is your question, then yes, go ahead and think to write a policy in the bucket, right? For example, you have 10 buckets, right? And you are thinking about one particular S3 bucket, that I want to give this particular S3 bucket access to who all, right? Then you need to look into the S3 bucket policies. So you want, suppose you have a my underscore test bucket and you want your to give access to this particular bucket to any X people, then go ahead and write a bucket policies, right? What will we write in the bucket policies? We need to write in the bucket policies with particular grant access or deny access, and we need to define what? We need to define principal. Yes, S3 bucket policies, we always need to define the principal. So you want to simple way to grant cross account access also, that you can mention here. Or there is one more condition, that sometimes we are forced to go to the S3 bucket, is the IAM policy size, because normally the IAM policies gives you 2 kilobyte for particular users, 5 kilobyte for groups, and 10 KB for the roles, right? So these limits are consumed if you write up such a big policies which are consuming these limits. Then S3 also helps in that particular case to create a bucket policies which is 20 KB in size. So that is one of the case, and you can keep access control policy in the S3 environment. So that's the cases where you can think of writing a S3 bucket policies. So we said, okay man, we have done with bucket policy, we are done with the IAM policy. So where is the ACL? Oh my god, when to use the ACL now? It's again, that is the piece which is left now. So ACL is, as when we talking about ACL, I'm talking about the S3 ACL, just to be more precise and clear here. So ACL is a very old guy, okay? He's like our legacy, okay? It's predated than the IAM, okay, as it is mentioned, okay? So ACL is legacy based, and AWS recommend you do not use ACL, okay? It always recommend either you go and write down S3 bucket policies, or you write down the IAM policies, okay? So that's what the AWS recommend. And you know what, whenever you create a bucket, the moment you create a bucket, you can see one ACL is created by default, okay? That will show you that you have access to that particular bucket, you are the owner, right? And however, you can manage the ACL, for the cross account access as well. But don't guys, don't try to use ACL much, okay? And you don't need to try to either use bucket policies or the IAM policies, always the control. It's ACL is when there was no IAM in the beginning, then ACL was used to control the bucket, okay? Because S3 is the one of the services which are launched at the very early stage. At that time IAM was also not there. So that's why the ACL is legacy. That's what Amazon says. And if you find already created the ACL policy, that's fine, perfect, no need, keep it up. You don't need to change that, but you can use the S3 bucket policy or IAM policies, okay? I'll just show you how does it looks like in the portal. You might have access, you can check yourself. And so you can give ACL access, the sub ACL, as I mentioned here, it's a sub resources and attached to the every ACL S3 buckets. So you go with the IAM policy, you go with the bucket policies, and keep the ACL silent mode. You don't need to touch more the ACL again and again, okay? So one question will come into our mind, what if all three active with conflicting policies, right? So if you have a ACL configured, if you have a bucket policies or any kind of policies or IAM policies configured, how does the which will finally, so for example, Johnny, I have given a right allow permission in the IAM policies, but I have mentioned in the bucket policies with the Johnny as a deny, right? So which one will win in that case? So what will happen is, first decision is start with the deny. Yes, the moment Johnny will try to access, it will deny, okay? In the not deny in the sense the final result, it will any access will be evaluated with the decision as a deny. and then it will check all the policy whether the Johnny has access in evaluate all the policy. And what it will check at the third step, it will check if Johnny has explicitly deny in IAM policies, yes or no. It has explicitly deny in the bucket policy, yes or no. Anywhere it is deny mentioned, if it is yes, anywhere we have mentioned deny, then Johnny will not get access, it will deny. If there is no deny mentioned, then it will check whether Johnny has given allow. Did we allow Johnny to grant access in the IAM policy? Yes or no? Or did we allow Johnny to grant access in the bucket policies? If it is yes, then Johnny will grant access. If we have not mentioned allow also, we have not mentioned deny also, then final decision will be deny. By default, Johnny will not get access. So if you have not mentioned allow or deny, then deny. Final will be deny. If you mention deny, then of course it will be deny. If you mention anywhere allow, then it will be allowed, right? Not deny. If you mention one as a deny, one as a allow, then deny will win and it will get denied, right? So I'll just show you guys where we have the bucket policies and the IAM policies in the management portal AWS. So if you go to the S3 bucket here, let it open. And if you find these are the bucket I have just created for testing, and let's take this one of the bucket, right? So if you go to the permission here, we see the bucket policies are there, right? And it is empty. So here you can write down the bucket policies as per your requirement, right? And ACL is defined here. So as I mentioned, that every bucket, the moment you create a bucket, ACL will be generated, yes. And it will show you that your account only has a permission, read write permissions, right? Since you are the owner of the account, right? You created this account, so your account will be getting, but you can authenticate or give the cross account access and other access in the bucket ACL, which is one of the option available. And other options that you need to write in the bucket policies is here, where a specific particular users, any kind of access that you can create. If you don't know the JSON, you can go ahead and do a policy generator, and if you click here, it will select, choose you bucket policy. You can select here, you can allow, you can put the principal, because yes, of course, any bucket policy we need to define principal. That is the key difference of the IAM policy. You don't need to define principal because it is already attached to the principal, users, roles, groups, all these things, right? Bucket policy, you must need to define principal. You define a principal here, you select the action, what kind of action you want, create bucket actions or delete bucket role, delete object roles, whatever the permission you want to give, action. And then the ARN is what? ARN of the bucket, yes, which bucket you want to give access, right? So ARN in the bucket, ARN of the principal, these two things we attach it, and then we attach it, and then we save it, and it will generate a policy. When it is generated, you just copy it and paste it here and save it. So guys, that's how we have tried to show you that how you can differentiate between the bucket policies, ACL policies, IAM policies, and when to use, which is your situation to use. And that will be hopeful it will make your things a little bit clear and help you understanding more on the AWS security front. Thank you all. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the session. Gives us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe our channel. We'll keep publishing some key aspects, some new things like this only. And thank you. Thanks for the time. Bye bye.